Hello, I'm Ricardo. I'm going to be taking on Era 3. This is between the years of 1754 through the 1800. We're going to start off with England attempting to reassure their control over the 13 colonies right after the Seven Years' War. Um, right after the Seven Years' War, the colonies react and declare their independence and become a new nation. This is the birth of the United States. This is, as of now, it's still the 13 colonies, um, the 13 original colonies, but this, in a sense, it's still the baby United States. Soon after, we have the disagreements of social, political, and economic identity of the baby United States. In the year 1763, we see the end of the 7 Years' War, and England ends the period of solitary neglect towards the new nation, also known as the United States, for that for the reason that they're now, wait for it, broke. During the years of 1763 and 1776, we saw many acts being in place and brought back by the British to come out of bankruptcy. Such acts for the Navigation Act of 1763, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, Stamp Act of 1765, the Sugar Act of 1764, the Intolerable Act of 1774, the Townshend Acts of 1767, Quebec Act of 1774, the Quartering Act of 1765, and the Declaratory Act of 1766. Along with these acts came rebellious groups and actions to go against them. Such groups and acts were the Stamp Act riots of 1765, the Stamp Act Congress of 1765, the Sons of Liberty also 1765, and the Boston Tea Party of 1773. We see the Committees of Correspondence. This was the first meeting, which was held in 1764, and then we see the Continental Congress in 1774. It was a meeting between the 13 colonies, and then soon, a few decades later, we see the Second Continental Congress also joining as well. Colonies when the colonies soon after declaring their independence, they win their war and gain their independence, and this was because of the influence of Thomas Paine's Common Sense in 1776 and Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence on July 4th of 1776. The colonies had a pretty big advantage to this war, in the sense that they knew the land and they had the French as allies, and they had better leadership. Soon after 1776, after the declaration, there was a rebuilding of the government that was based off of Enlightenment principles. We see political reformation, a change in voting, influential American revolutionization, and women begin to demand rights. We also see African Americans begin to demand their rights, and then they claim that the Constitution is pro-slavery. There is new governmental structures and a foundation in which many influential folk have changed the outcome with their ideas. People such as John Locke and Thomas Paine with common sense and the change of political views. We see the Articles of Confederation, it's founded, but then soon after, a lot of people disagree with it, and then the we see the Constitution come into place, and it replaces the Articles of Confederation in the government. Um, we see new laws, and we see that the states demand representation, and then we see that the representation is all depending on the amount of people they have in your state. So people begin to believe that this is unfair, and they want to have an equal representation or an equal voice in Congress. Excuse me. Um, we see uh, we see the Connecticut Compromise, which fixes this, and then we see the Three-Fifths Compromise. This was the belief in the South that that slaves were 3/5 of a person, and this was only for the reason that people in the South wanted to have a higher representation. In the government, we begin to see a limit to federal power, and then we see a beginning of the separation of powers. We see federalism and republicanism begin to rise. In the year 1789, we have the ratification of the new constitution. We have in the new constitution, we see the two houses of Congress. We have a power to tax, regulation of trade, a nationwide president. We see the Supreme Court that's above all courts, as we knew, and then we have Congress making and passing all laws. So anybody can, like, we have all laws being overviewed and then passed by Congress, depending on if they agree with them or not. After the ratification of the Constitution, there was two sides. There was the Federalists and we had the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists agreed with the Constitution and that it was needed. The Anti-Federalists felt that it was far too powerful, but they eventually agreed to have it ratified under the Bill of Rights. In 1786, we see Shays' Rebellion, and the people that are participating in Shays' Rebellion believe that the national government is far too weak, while on the other hand, in 1791, we have the Whiskey Rebellion, which these people believe that the national government is far too strong for their liking and that they will be taking advantage of the people. People begin to disagree with how the nation should be run, and that begins with Alexander Hamilton's financial program. And his financial program begins with his Federalist beliefs and manufacturing beliefs. On the other hand, we have Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans, which favor a weaker central government and a stricter constitution. Um, During these times, this was a really big growth of political parties, and we saw people begin to organize groups of like political views, and political statements, opinions, stances, etc. Uh, in the year 1798, we see the Alien and Sedition Acts by President John Adams, and these were like four laws that were created by the Federalists, I believe. And we have the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, 17 in the year 1798 and 1799. This said that the Alien and Sedition Acts were unconstitutional. And then after that, we have nullification. Uh, the basic definition of nullification is that any state can ignore a federal law if they feel it to be unconstitutional. So, the Alien and Sedition Acts were believed to be unconstitutional and they were nullified. We move along and we see disagreements between foreigners expand in the sense of political affairs. The French saw a war with Europe and the proclamation of neutrality by George Washington and the Convention of 1800, which was a war fought between the French and the Europeans because of certain agreements that seemed to be unfair. The British also saw a failure in the Treaty of Paris and had a new treaty made to avoid any further conflict between the United States and Great Britain in the year of 1794. As George Washington prepared for his farewell address in 1796, he strongly advocated for a nation with absolutely no political parties and for no permanent alliances because no one could be trusted. As far as I like to believe, he did not like to have political parties for the sense that there was a lot of arguments and people saw that they were like beginning to split apart the nation. And for the permanent alliances, he saw that they weren't always a good thing to have because of the amount of times that the treaties were broken, and like these peace treaties were like often ignored. Such as an example would be the Great Britain with the United States. As I had mentioned before, in the 1794, they had to make two different peace treaties. Moving on, in the election of 1800, we see the Democratic Republicans win the election, and we see that Thomas Jefferson becomes the president of the United States. Thomas Jefferson is a really like argumented against president because he had so many slaves, and people still view him as like a good president, but they often ignore the fact that he was oppressing so many people during his own life. Some main things that we can't forget to mention in the Era 3 is the Native Americans responded to European and American settlement by joining the French. We see this fail because when they joined the French failed, and the natives had to submit. Uh, sorry, the natives had to like go along with their own land